You know, he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
The next two books are the book for me. Like that's the parts that I
Yeah,
kind of
definitely.
stick in my mind the most. It's kind of funny, and maybe this is something we can talk about. How like the first three, although this chapter is like a little bit of a hinge point, but the first part of the book
Yeah.
is so diaphanous, almost fairy-like, in its like the the veil between the fairy worlds in that same way, like very gossamer sort of gossamer thin
Yeah,
and
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
wispy and that I literally read this like years ago, and the only thing I that struck me when I read it again that I remember was the Kingfisher stuff. Everything else is just sort of like a haze, you know? Like um but it's in
Yeah.
that second half of the book that like it really like the really fun stuff
Yeah,
happens.
definitely.
Yeah.
And like the the first half feels so naive,
Hmm.
and it's there isn't a single person that I've given this book to who has made it to the second half of this book because they just think that the entire thing is going to be this kind of like wispy, hazy sort of la la land, which is the reason why I loved it. So I'm kind
Hmm.
of offended. I'm like, you guys don't like hallucinating? Like, what's wrong with you? But yeah, this is definitely this part three is definitely the hinge of the book because we enter into the city. And actually, do you know what's kind of funny about? I wanted to go back to what you said about like it feeling diaphanous and fairy like. I forgot to mention this in the past couple of episodes, partly because I was hoping I would actually come across it in the book, but I have this really weird experience with Little Big. So the year that I read it, kind of carried it around Europe with me like a Bible or something.
Hmm.
Like I
Hmm.
literally was just carrying it from place to place. Um, and I read it, I read through it twice probably. And this one day, I forget exactly what happened. I think I might have gotten in a fight with my roommate or something, who was, my best friend at the time. And then we were supposed to go out and I needed like a pick me upper. So I opened up Little Big page towards the beginning and it gave me this like I read this I swear to God, I read this little paragraph. It was like one of the self-contained sections with a little subtitle beside it. Um and it was about the characters dancing around a crow and a crow landing and the characters dancing around it. And um the image really struck me and I remembered it so clearly. And I later went back through the book. The life of me could not find that section again. I bought it on Kindle, searched all of the keywords that I thought would pop up. I cannot and I was hoping I would come across it with this reading in my memory. It was towards the beginning of the book, but it could easily have been somewhere towards the end. Um, but very strange. It feels like I stumbled on like a DVD, like a deleted scene or something.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, definitely. But yeah, if you come across a section like that, or if you know, maybe you'll hallucinate your own chapter or something. I don't know. Do you ever misremember? Do you ever like remember things in books that aren't actually there?
Yeah, all the time. And in movies and in my life too. Like
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes I miss I will
Just
be
making shit
talking.
up.
Yeah, no, literally that's how much of a fucking I guess maybe it's a daydreamer thing or something because like I will have either like an idea or a concept or a daydream or even just a literal dream like that I had. that I will talk to someone who was somehow tangentially involved in a dream about, oh yeah, so remember when
Hmm.
that happened? And obviously it's the more mundane dreams that like fool you into thinking they're a memory. But and then people will look at me like, what? That didn't happen. And I'm like, I think
Yeah.
it's the movie Gaslight. You know, like it's
Yeah, you're like, I'm just such an imaginative person. I'm like always thinking all the time.
yeah.
So, it must have just been one of my beautiful little my beautiful little thoughts.
Yeah, I'm a manic pixie dream boy. That's what I am.
Yeah.
We're fairy boys, remember, because of the monobrow. Although my partner was plucking my
You're what?
eyebrows the other day. I'm a fairy boy because of the monobrow, remember? So,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
yeah.
I have mine a little bit. The hair but when I think I shaved them recently with probably which I guess like might have lessened my magical abilities. Or something. Um so yeah, so this section opens up with August. Wait, sorry, not August. Oberon.
Oberon. Yeah.
Oberon, whatever.
Oberon.
Um, yeah, moving to and he has a very unibrowy goodbye to
Hmm.
his sisters. Um, and the beginning of this section has one of my favorite chapters. I forget if it's at the beginning of chapter 2 or at the end of chapter 1. Oh,
As
well, first
in,
of all, we're introduced to the theme of this. Oh, here we go. Oh wait, nope, sorry. I'm a moron. Um, so yeah, so we're introduced to a few important things in this section at the beginning. One is the introduction of Russell Engelbach.
hmm
Am I getting that right?
very, very
Russell
important.
Agent Blick. Agent Blick.
Yeah.
Russell
Eigenblick.
Agent Blick.
Asian
Um,
Blick.
yeah, Eigen Blick. Asian Blick.
Asian Brick.
Yeah, exactly. Asian, yeah, okay. I'm like in my family's house, so I can't. uh, but so yeah, so the section that I really like in this, first of all, there's that really magical scene where he is taking the underground train and he runs into that black man who's obsessed with women's
Yes.
furs.
Yes.
Yeah. Which I love because like this is it's such an innocent book
Mm,
that like your average person wouldn't even really pick up on a
mm.
section like this. Like they wouldn't like think of this as like offensive or anything. But I love like the little how he calls his eyes wise, humorous, and reptilian all at once, and the way
Yeah.
that he like describe the way that he describes this guy talking is so funny. He says, calling me? Nope. Okay. Don't get me wrong, a well-dressed woman's something to see, a thing of beauty. You understand? The way he spells you
Yeah.
understand in
Yeah.
one word. You understand?
You
A
understand? Yeah.
joy, a joy feather. A joy feather. What I'm talking about is a woman who wears a pho. A woman who
Mm.
wears a pho. I don't know. He gets generic black accent really, really well. Um, and then after that, the oh yeah, the Ormolu mirror that swings around the sky.
Mm.
That to me was a really magical image. I've always remembered that when he is approaching he's approaching like George Mouse's place or maybe the
Mm.
old law farm. And they're an apartment building, and the mirror kind of tips over on its strings and starts swinging above the crowd, and he describes everyone's faces catching in the mirror, as you know, and sort of looking up like the crowd's like waiting to see themselves in the swinging mirror, which I thought was really, I don't know, very a very potent image, I guess.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know.
It actually reading
It's
about
a
that
magical transition.
reminded me of there's this like art installation or something that I found out about this via work actually because we did a story on it. But it's this art installation which is like a live sort of like what we're doing now, like webcam, but it's a public installation, so like in a public space. And I think it's like somewhere in Austin to somewhere in Chicago or New York or something like that. And it was like this thing where people could connect, like in, two public spaces or whatever.
Mm,
And they ended up having to shut it down because I think this wasn't stated, but I think it was the unhoused were flashing their genitals and shit like that. So that scene just reminded me about waiting for the
sorry,
mirror
that
to
was
go.
just me. I actually ruined it for everyone.
Yeah, you're giving people a preview because when you move to Chicago, or
A
should I
little
not said that?
exactly. The other thing that we're introduced to in this section is the soap opera,
Yes. What's it
A
called?
World Elsewhere.
A world elsewhere. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And Oberon becomes a
um,
writer for it, or is that in this section or later? I think it's
yeah,
later, but like it's floated in this section, I
yeah,
think. Um, which is so
yeah.
great.
He become a writer for the show in this section. But I love A World Elsewhere sounds exactly like the name of a soap opera, except sort of Crowleyan because John Crowley loves words like somewhere and elsewhere.
Hmm.
Those are like the two words that he uses, basically. Um, so yeah, and then the other thing we're introduced to is Oberon's love interest, who's Puerto Rican,
She's
named
Puerto
Sylvie.
Rican. She's a Puerto Rican
Puerto,
queen.
I ain't no I'm no Mexican. I'm Puerto Rican.
Hola, mis amores. Are you ready to see my
Yeah,
cuckoo?
exactly. Taco burrito.
Yeah.
um. Anyway, she's Puerto Rican because John Crowley has to keep in the American family, you know.
Mm, mm,
Um. And Puerto Rican's still America.
mhm. Yeah, when is it going to be a state
So
already?
never. It benefits Puerto Rico to not really become a state for one reason or another.
Mm.
Um, Mostly because they get a bitch and moan about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's really the reason why it's not a state.
And they could just send queens to drag
But
race, um,
exactly,
without having to have
have to
their
talk
separate
about.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Puerto Ricans was great. Like, yeah, him coming to the city. One thing I wanted to say about the soap opera too, like A World Elsewhere, like I find, and yeah, you are right that it's Crowleyan because what's really funny about, that's not funny, but it's interesting about soap operas is like this idea of this other world, like this other world, but like
Hmm.
the concerns and, like, unless it gets into like your passions area where it's like witches and shit like that. But mostly soap operas are very mundane, sort of like, and,
Yeah.
they're set in our world and nothing too kind of outlandish happens. Like it's all like, well, that's debatable, but it's all like within the realms of possibility, like, and,
Hmm.
but then they all have these names, like another world, like a world elsewhere, or, and so like gesturing towards, some kind of, yeah, magical world, but it's also like mundane at the same time. And this is what he's doing too. Like, that's why what we were talking about
Yeah.
at the start of the episode, which, it's almost like, so the first kind of, I would say, half of this book is almost like a soap opera. It's that like the interplay between these families, family really, but also like the outer the family tree and people who they know and people who are tangentially related to them and all this sort of stuff. And then it's sort of like it's almost like it becomes a late soap opera. Like we won't get into it yet because it's a read along, but once the more magical stuff starts happening in the second half of the book, it's all like it's almost like a soap opera that's sort of run out of ideas, and it's like, okay, now let's do the Marlena possession arc. Like it's
Yeah.
that sort of like, but it's not. But like it starts in this like very kind of grounded, mundane, and yet sort of like I said, diaphanous and sort of subtly kind of magical at the start, and then brings that forward a little bit more in the second half, which is why it's such a hard thing to recommend to people as well, because it's like you do have to get through all that, which I love. Like, I'm not going to deny that I love all of the first part of the
Yeah.
book, but like I was saying, it's not the stuff that like I remembered from when I first read it. Like I was more struck by what happens in the second part of the book. But yeah, it's just a very interesting, there's a comparison there to be made with soap operas, I think.
Yeah, and like I think also the way that soap operas create this kind of mobile like eternity, this like other that exists alongside yours. Um
Time
I
expands and
definitely feel like
contracts.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And like it's this world that's like kind of held at arm's length almost. And also the introduction of television is almost kind of surprising in this book because of how kind of old fashioned it kind of it's like a it's like an echo of that cottage nightlight almost, where it's such a startlingly modern image in this seemingly kind of like, I don't know, sort of like wishy-washy kind of like corny Americana world.
Mm,
And when you realize like, oh, television exists in this world, people not only watch television but it's a really big deal, and actually this book exists in the entire universe of pop culture. It's the touches that you usually expect fantasy to find some way to skirt around. Like in a lot of fantasy novels, at least, in theory, don't want to deal with the modern world. They want to deal with, you know, pure human passions that aren't mediated by like technology and
mm.
modernity or whatever. Um, so they ignore those things. And so like when you hear that like there are characters watching television jarring for some reason, you're like, television, like what the hell? Like when they talk about Russell Ijan Blick, whatever the hell his name is. Have you listened to the audiobook? Do you know how he pronounces it there?
No, don't know.
No? Okay. I know that the audiobook is read by John Crowley. I should probably listen to that at some point. And also figure out how to pronounce this villain's name. But anyway, they talk about him being trained for television, really good on television.
Mm.
So, you're aware of this like massive pop cultural kind of world out there that Oberon is just kind of he's just too naive to really like fully comprehend at this point in the story.
Yeah, and I also think that the Drinkwaters and the denizens of Edgewood, so to speak, the large rambling mansion, which we mentioned in the first episode, are probably the sort of family that doesn't watch TV anyway. Like, like,
Yeah, yeah.
they're which I always found those families weird, but they exist.
Yeah.
But why would you? I wouldn't watch TV if I had like a house like that, connected to the fairy
Oh yeah,
realm.
me either. Yeah, exactly. Um,
Uh,
I knew this one girl who reminds me so much of the Drinkwater family, she also had like a crazy unibrow. Like
hmm.
we're talking like full on caterpillar unibrow, like and she had this
Was she
like kind of
Greek?
weird feral. I actually don't even know. I met her at summer camp, at like arts summer camp. And she was like she was this like kind of like feral outcast who was like so just like unsocialized, but something was so interesting about her. Um, and yeah, he mentions the unibrow. The first thing I thought was this like this poor feral creature who's probably out there, playing with destiny and whatever, making little magic circles to save America at this point. So that's getting ahead of things.
Hmm. But yeah, the introduction of TV is jarring because you start reading it. It's not really the from the beginning clear what the era is. Although there are things like from the
Oh
very
yeah.
beginning when Smokey goes his way, because clearly there's cars and buses, and I think even he mentions typewriters in the first chapter of the book. But even so, it's sort of
Mhm.
like you have this, again, I keep coming back to this word diaphanous. You have this diaphanous sense of where we are, being, I would say, vaguely in the early 20th century, but I think it's much later. But the way that it reads is sort of there, like to me anyway. Like, and obviously as it goes on, it becomes much more modern because we sort of flash forward in time, to we meet Smokey and Daily Alice as kids, and we also flash back in time as well. So this is like playing with time that happens in the book that can be a little bit discombobulating because then you're like, oh, there's TV now. Like it's very sudden, and that's very important as well for the Russell Eigenblick character, like you said, which by the way, like is very charismatic and learned all he needed to learn on TV. That sounds like someone. It's actually, we'll get to it
Yeah,
because
exactly.
we don't get to see more of him until like the second half of the book, but we'll get to that. But
Yeah.
like, he is such a Trumpian figure. Like, it's actually eerie how
He is
like,
very Trump. Yeah.
yeah, how it kind of prefigures it because this was written in 81, and I guess Trump was around then, but like, wasn't the pop culture figure that he is now. So yeah, but yeah, really cool sort of reference there.
Yeah. Like a weird kind of prophecy almost.
Mm,
And it's not really as simple as Russell Eigen Blick being a villain. He's not really seen like book really comprehends him as a villain, and
mm,
um it feels like the story casts him in this very specific role. Ariel Hawksquill, who we're also introduced
mm,
to in this section. Um, John Crowley has actually talked in an interview about how Ariel Hawksquill was a character that he invented for basically like, sorry, I'm like burping from the corona.
that's all right.
Hawksquill was invented for he like wanted like a Sherlock Holmes like series basically, where Ariel Hawkswill ran around solving esoteric mysteries and
With
whatever.
tarot
I'm
cards
glad
or,
that
or astrology or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
That's a
exactly.
great idea. I love that.
With the art of memory. Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
I mean, yeah, I would want him to like almost write that on the side and then all of it come
mm,
out, at once or something. But yeah, she eventually very important secondary role in this novel, where she is brought in as a consultant to the Noisy Rod and Gun Club, who are basically a bunch of like they're basically like a bunch of conservatards, pretty
mm,
much. Like it's like kind of like how I would describe them, like very sympathetic and with, but like just like, they remember some old kind of America, kind of like, the the degeneration of the country, but they're just such morons. Like they're so thick-headed, and like nothing gets through to them. And the only thing, like even there are people even within the Noisy Rotten Gun Club who hear these cliches that Russell Eigenblick, just kind of he's really obsessed with like love and equality. Basically, his a human rights campaign slogan or something. He has all these Puerto Ricans following him. And yeah, that's the other things that Russell Blick is not associated with Republican or Democrat, but he seems to be a kind of, at least from what I can tell, maybe this is me projecting, he seems like a kind of apocalyptic, progressive sort of a figure. But maybe that's been reading too much into it. But yeah, the Noisy Rod Gun Club brings Ariel Hawksquill on as a consultant for them. And Ariel Hawksquill has, she considers herself a kind of magician, but her magic is her quote unquote magic is kind of surprising as a reader, because all of it seems like abilities that you can imagine yourself acquiring. Like for you learn about the art of memory, which is actually a real practice.
Like she talks about Giordano Bruno, who's like I think he was one of the ones, like it's an ancient thing, like the method of loci, it's sometimes called, but like the idea of the mind palace, that being so basically her magical powers is her mind palace. But I think Bruno was like an occultist as well, or some kind of hermeticist, if I remember correctly. Like a lot of those Renaissance guys were. But so I think he's doing some really cheeky there by like her magical powers is the more mundane stuff. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it goes back to basically, I think, what the book is trying to, like, I think that the book is trying to argue that kind of like magical or supernatural quality to it. And we're given this long section where Ariel Hawksquill walks through her entire memory palace. And the idea of a memory palace, I'm sure people are semi-familiar with it, but basically you attribute images in your head with memories, and if you build out this pattern enough, you eventually kind of can create entire geographies. And Giordano Bruno supposedly incredibly elaborate internal palaces, and the memory to kind of prove it. Like according to people who knew him, he really did have just this encyclopedic knowledge of everything, and could just pull any memory or any little tidbit out of his head. John Crowley has said that he does not practice the art of memory.
He doesn't seem like the kind that would.
By it. Exactly. And Giordano Bruno is later covered in the Egypt cycle, which I've only read the first of. Half of the first book in the Egypt cycle is like a novel. Half of the novel is a different novel about Giordano Bruno. And I'm guessing the later novels follow him, as he's like eventually burned to the stake for heresy, like studied at Oxford and was always getting into fights with people. He wrote these texts that are very kind of imaginative, but like very extra biblical as well. So they rubbed people the wrong way. And he was eventually. And the thing that's weird about Giordano Bruno that really irks me is he is often remembered today by kind of like the being a kind of martyr for science, when that's just not true. He wasn't martyred for any scientific for whatever scientific claims he was making. He was martyred for these theological disputes. So it's one of those things where, like, people, if you like look at like new atheist literature or whatever, he's someone who, oh, look at what the church has done to us atheists. And it's just not true.
It's like another religious impulse which people made at the time, critiquing those guys, like that they're very religious in their fervor for non-belief, and so they obviously they need their martyrs, right? So they need Bruno, they need like Galileo, they need all these guys who so which is an interesting thing. Hypatia, yeah.
They like bringing her up too, even though she was a pagan. She was a pagan. She believed in the supernatural.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting about do you remember that a few years ago there was that controversy with that woman philosopher who she wrote in a philosophy journal called Hypatia. That it was like she was comparing Rachel Dolezal to, like, transgender in general, so saying transracialism and transgenderism is basically the same thing. Like, it's like this person says she feels black, so why would we not accept what we say in the other case, but in the others we would, and she got like raked across the coals and got cancelled and shit like that. But I just think it's funny. I just think it's funny that the paper that she published that in was called Hypatia, which was when she was basically, Hypatia was literally ripped to shreds by religious fanatics, which is like, it's perfect. It's like, mwah, chef's kiss, like.
Yeah, exactly. Things really do travel full circle in this world. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I feel like wokeness, which is something that I'm so tired of talking about, but the only reason why I'm so obsessed with it is because it's still everywhere in the culture. I literally would not care about these freaks if it wasn't that every single cultural institution in the entire country was run by them, and all of the content was dictated by them. Like, they can go have their little protests, encampments, or whatever. I just want good movies and good books to come out, and I don't want 90% of literature's audience to be liberal females, which it currently is. Like, it's a real shame. Like, men used to look. Can you imagine a world where men look forward to the new Philip Roth book? Like, can you imagine that kind of? And they've basically just sold off the entire publishing industry to like frigid liberal females, and look at it now, it's like a complete wasteland. And these women don't read. They buy the books, but they don't read them. Like, I know these women, they don't read the fucking books.
They have book clubs where they just get drunk and don't talk about the book they didn't read.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I feel like the scourge of wokeness is largely because, like, people's, especially like in a country like America where nobody socializes anymore, people have kind of like dangerously literal minds and like literal imaginations, and that's kind of why in times like these very, very straight talking literal people sort of, who give these very rigid definitions to things um, sort of rise up into prominence, because people basically like they don't have people to kind of like match their intelligence to. Like America is such a lonely country. I don't know what Australia
Mm.
is like, but America is like an incredibly lonely, lonely, lonely country. And I'm not just saying that because, but like everyone that I know in America, like they don't socialize the way that they do in like Europe or,
Mm.
just like nobody really comprehends that aspect of the US, especially right now. And so I think like basically because in the vacancy that's created, people just need this like hyper literal sort of uh a sort of established worldview. That's kind of what you start to get in this section of Little Big. They talk
Mm.
about John Crowley claims he came up with this idea himself, but the foldable bedroom,
Mm.
which is now literally an idea, but supposedly when he came up with the idea, this idea of a foldable bedroom did not exist. Um, and the idea is literally just like a room that's slightly too small to live in. So instead of a bed, you have like a bed that you unfold from the wall. But like it's like for in John Crowley's universe, it's kind of this like symbol of like magical atomization
Yeah, yeah.
almost like and um
But also,
you I don't know, yeah.
it's a great pale imitation of this theory that the original, I can't even get the name straight, but like I think the original Oberon Drinkwater theorized about like the idea of the universe itself, like and encompassing the fairy world, being like so much of it is we talked about this in the first episode, that it's like these concentric spheres, and the further you go into, they're very tiny in our world, but the further you go into them, the bigger they get, sort of thing. Kind of like TARDIS in Doctor Who, if you
Mm.
watch that show, which has fallen from grace, unfortunately. But so just, and like a lot of the action and magic and interesting stuff in this book happens in those folds. It's about folding and unfolding, almost like concertina.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, yeah, like but that room, that like pokey little room where like there's such a great scene as well where is it one of the Puerto Ricans? I think it is. Goes to change or go to the bathroom or something like that, and the door like can't open fully because it hits the bed. Like that's
Oh
how,
yeah. Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
it's this like
That's so
pale,
real.
yeah, this like pale like imitation of this like vast, expansive universe, like completely reduced down to like, oh, a small room with folds. It's just very, there's something, he's doing something there, I think, that's very interesting, that it's like saying something about the way we live and the spaces we inhabit. And um, yeah, so you can have these tiny kind of globular fairy realms that, the Drinkwater ancestors talking about, but they're not actually tiny. But whereas this one is like a literal physical tiny space. And so yeah, he's saying something about, definitely about atomization, I think, and modernity and shit like that, all that good stuff.
In an apartment that is a little bit too small for you, you do literally feel like Alice from Alice in Wonderland.
Mm.
Like when she takes the big drink or whatever. Yeah, I mean, my apartment right now is just like slightly too small for me, and I feel like I'm constantly like bumping my knee on shit, and I don't know, just like can't wait to live in a bigger place. And yeah, but it's part of like the thing that's exciting about John Crowley expand um is to see him like expand the aesthetic of the first two books
Mm,
into the city, basically, which is like something that you don't expect him to be able to do because it feels. Or are you still there?
yeah. Sorry, I was just turning my video off. Yeah.
Okay. Oh no, you're good. It's not something that you expect him to be able to do because it wasn't something that I expected him to do because the first two books felt so ingrained in this like in this world, in this like little world that's like away from everything. I don't expect it to come back to the big bad city. Um, but yeah, we're sort of starting our descent now into sort of like the into the pits. I was wondering, Matthew, have you ever had a big bad?
Big bad. Sorry, you cut out there. What did you say? Big bad what?
Oh, have you ever had like a big bad journey through like the great city?
But New York, or do you mean just the great city in the sense
Yeah, I mean,
of
just yeah, in general.
in general? Yeah, the thing is that cities here are very different to the US. Like we have big cities, but they're very and you do have grungy parts, but just generally Australia is way cleaner than the US. Like we have
Mm,
so it's kind of hard to you don't get it's not the same but I've traveled widely so I know what you're talking about there but in terms of living I wouldn't say so traveling yes like you know
mm.
trudging through the muck, like on a winter's night in New York or Chicago or something like that. Yes, I've done that, but I've never like paid my dues in terms of like living in a flop house in a fucking disgusting,
Oh,
area of town. Is
well,
that
yeah,
what you're getting at?
I
Or
haven't done that. Yeah. No, I was just wondering, like, it really, like, I mean, like, I've never like become an alcoholic or something like what happens to Oberon,
Mm,
homeless, but, sorry, I think I just ruined something, but whatever.
that's
Um,
right.
but yeah, no, it's just like, it feels like this like introduction to the city is it's interesting because he pairs it along with like Sylvie, who's this like POC girl, and like moving to the city and tying that to like your first introduction to a brown girl. It's just like it's interesting to me. Uh, sorry, this Corona's kind of fucking my stomach up.
That's all right.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's just making me think back to the past like 5 years of my life because I've just been like living in all of these different cities and sort of going through the whirly gig of like the urban landscape. So,
You do, in some ways you do feel, I get where I guess what Crowley is getting at with the apartment and everything. You do feel reduced when you move to the city, particularly if you come from a place that is very expansive. Like I moved from
yeah.
like, not a country town, but like a smaller town. And so there was much more space. Like you could get more bang for your buck in terms of accommodation, like rentals and stuff like that. Um, but in some senses, your life becomes reduced spatially in terms of your apartments and housing and stuff like that. But it unfolds in other ways, I guess. Maybe that's something
Yeah.
that he's sort of getting at. Although, yeah, like you said, Oberon does become an alcoholic, poisonously so, so like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, there is some people some people let that, this is an old cliche, but some people let the city kind of crush them, but others sort of thrive in that environment,
Yeah,
pressure, diamonds, etc., etc.
yeah, yeah. Um, have you seen those images of Madonna on the bus
No. Oh, yes. No, I
getting
have.
passed
Yeah.
around?
Yes. So good.
Are those images real? Because I swear to God, I zoomed in on one of them and her fingers look really fucked up.
Oh my God. Are they AI?
I don't know. When I saw one, it's one of those things though where like her fingers look interlaced with each other, and it could just be a weird moment in the camera, or it could be
Mhm.
AI. When you talked about, you know, someone's spirit becoming a diamond, I thought of Madonna riding the bus,
Mm.
for some reason. But I don't know. You should look those pictures up.
Okay.
Because I swear to God, I feel like they might be AI generated, and it's the fact that I don't know is kind of what's wigging me out.
Mm.
And that like I can't decide whether I think that's the case.
Mm.
Um,
It's the corner of your eye magic
but
of
yeah, I
the
don't know.
internet, I guess. Like, because you know how John
I
Crowley's got
know.
that, like, the magic in this book is the corner of the eye thing that we've talked about so
I
far.
know. Yeah.
But I've actually heard it described as well. Like, it'd be interesting. It's an interesting counterfactual to think about this book. Like, if it were written today, like, because he would have to incorporate the internet, and like, how would he do that? Because the internet itself is almost like
Yeah.
an astral realm, Like I like thinking about it like that because I know that people say that, the
Yeah.
internet is real now because things that happen online and stuff like that do bleed into the real world. But that's the same with the idea of the fairy realm, like the astral, this sort of
Hmm.
like very close like almost parallel world that sometimes things cross over and back and things like that. I feel like it's a really good
Hmm.
metaphor for the internet. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the internet, rather than being a tunnel inward, I think it's, where like it feels like this expansive moment, but yeah, like I mean, in the concentric circle matrix, the further in you go, the bigger each circle gets.
Hmm.
And to me, there's like the internet feels at first like this spell of liberation. But I feel like especially today, if John Crowley were to write about the internet, if you were to write it through the lens of Little Big, I think it would kind of feel like he was, like it doesn't like to me it would feel like a kind of a betrayal to the actual experience and the actual like real social destruction the internet has caused, which to me is pretty undeniable.
Mm.
Um, it's kind of it's the elephant in the room. Like when I go outside and I see two parents walking with their kid, the little kid's on an iPad.
Mm.
It's like kind of it's actually like deeply disturbing, to be honest. I know I feel like the kind of Shay, I feel almost like a reactionary on Fox News even saying that, but
Yeah.
like my older sister who has a child has even mentioned it. And she doesn't let my niece, go close to her iPad. She lets a small window of time every day, but she talks about kind of how disturbing it is for to like see her friends just like throw iPads at their kids, and just
Mm.
like literally their kids just sit inside all day.
Mm.
Um, and it's almost such a banal thing that you sound like a moron for even bringing it up. But um, I mean, yeah, I feel like again, like the internet feels like you're jacking in and you're zooming into the matrix. But I feel like it's another concentric circle around us rather than one that's like deeper and
Mm.
bigger.
Yeah. That's a
Um,
good way of putting it. And also like Yeah, it's funny because yeah, you do sound like an old person on cable news, but also there is
Yeah,
it's not like, you know, he talks about TV in this and the like the toxic influence of TV in like the early 80s or
yeah,
whatever. But and you know, by that point, TV had been around for at least 3 decades. So like it's not, but the thing is that
yeah, yeah.
there is something different. Like that's why I say I think on a previous episode we were complaining about it was more phones, I think. I was talking about this with the guys from Agitator, and we were talking about like, yeah, we sound like old men yelling at clouds, but we're the first old men yelling at clouds in history to be right. You know, like that because
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
internet, it is different. It is qualitatively different than all of these other media that came before it, you know, like TV, radio. And yeah, people will always point to, oh yeah, people criticized newspapers when they first arrived. People even criticize books when they first arrived. The church was not happy with all those
Yeah.
books, you know. So it's like, and same with radio, same with TV, but there is a qualitative difference now. There really is. Um,
And what I say to people who say that is that I say, well, we're the first generation to cope with the apocalyptic influence of phones by pointing to the past. Socrates didn't like writing,
hmm,
like we're the first generation to constantly say that and like
hmm,
constantly just push the onus onto the past. It's the same thing with like now whenever you see articles that ask the question, is the novel dead? It's always like, well, actually it isn't dead because look at all this great, brave new work that's going on. And to me, it's like the fact that we have to pep ourselves up and like kind of like justify this medium that is like clearly kind of dead. Like, men don't read books anymore, which means that like it's pretty much gone.
neither do
And I
women,
feel
though,
like
by the way.
people have
They
to
buy
kind of
books, but they don't read them. Yeah.
exactly. And like you have to like kind of like confront that pretty honestly, I think, if you like have any artistic ambition whatsoever. Um, but yeah, I see a lot of cope about technology, and people always say that thing about Socrates not liking the written word or whatever.
Mm.
That's always what I hear every single time, and I'm just like, well, like when newspapers were released, were people s- comparing it to Socrates? Like, I
Mm.
actually like don't really think so for some reason. But yeah, I don't feel like there's. I feel like hopefully phones kind of degenerate the human race. It's kind of like um it's like the edge of the screen in the simulation almost. Phones like kind of degenerate the human race enough that we sort of still have something to build back up to, you
Mm.
know?
Mm.
So it'll like give us something fun to
Yeah, and
do.
like those of us who do read and do aren't on our phones constantly are basically the Ubermensch. So like, you know, and
Basically,
didn't
basically.
even have to do that much work. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, exactly.
it's great.
Have you seen American Horror Story season 7?
Which one's that?
That's Cult.
No, I haven't. I haven't seen that one.
Oh, okay. That is the best episode of or the best season of American Horror Story. It's the season. It has no supernatural elements whatsoever in it. And it starts with who's basically like an NPR lesbian. Has like a psychotic meltdown the night that Trump is elected. And then later it's revealed that she actually voted for Jill Stein, which is a big point of contention in her like marriage. But wait, why did I bring this up? Um,
Phones,
shit.
like media, like
Uh,
phones being bad, internet stuff.
yeah. So Evan Peters, I think is the name of the actor. Evan Peters, his character gives this monologue in the very first episode. The very first episode is my favorite episode of American Horror Story ever. And the monologue he gives is about how basically he gives this prophecy that in the future um they're voting to like expand at like the synagogue. They want to like send the city council wants to send police officers to the synagogue, and this guy Kai, played by Evan Peters, shows up and is like, people don't want safety anymore. They want to be scared. They want to be scared shitless. They want to literally think that their lives are constantly gonna end. And what we need are less security guards. We need people so scared and so frightened that they look to strong to be sort of like corralled and guided. And that's like, I mean, like, you know, that's what we basically went through for the past 6 years. Now I feel like we're getting to another tipping point where younger Zoomers are actually so indoctrinated into smartphones that they just kind of deal with it, but also they're like a little bit anesthetized and kind of like uninterested in things, you know. Like this new generation is going to be the most compliant generation in human history. I truly think that. They're just going to want to like kind of get the job done and like get through the day in order to scroll their phone at night. I like truly think that's what it's going to kind of be.
Wow, that's sad.
I know. It is really sad.
I think you're right, though.
I mean, you know,
yeah.
I something could kind of, I don't know, like what would even like the thing is that like I feel like the phones are like part of the reason why they de-glamorize reality so severely is because we know that everyone is equally addicted to them. You know, at the very top and at the very bottom, you know, everybody across the chain, everyone spends all day on their fucking phone. And everyone has little apps that they're constantly looking at. And yeah, I feel like because we all are like connected by the usage of these devices, there's like something very de-glamorizing about it. You know, there's like something that is kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like you see.
I don't know how you. I'm sorry to. I really am starting to sound like an old man.
No, it's fine. Like I'm sound like an old man all the time as well. Like it's part of the podcast vibe, I guess. But like, yeah, like it's weird though because I don't know if it's rose tinted glasses or whatever, but it didn't seem to be like, for instance, early Twitter, for example, you literally had like celebrities on there just like responding to people, and it didn't seem to like de-glamorize it in a way. Whereas now, like it's just like anytime a celebrity like says something or replies to something or quote tweets someone, some lobby or whatever, like it's always just sort of like really lame and like, why are you doing that? Why are you like reducing yourself to this? You know, you want like your glamorous stars to be glamorous and like remote, you know, and that's another reason why I don't think there are movie stars anymore, because like you said, they're all on their phones too. Even if like I think some of the old school ones, like all their social media accounts and stuff like that, they will have interns running them. But even so, like, even if it's not their official accounts, all of the celebrities are all on their phones as well. So it's like it makes them closer to people rather than removed. And they do need to be distant glamour requires distance, I think. Like you can't have glamour up close.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So, that's why there's no movie stars.
Yeah. I mean, I also think like, pardon me, phones have really the technology itself has like stolen a lot of drama out of everyday life. You know, like think about all of the movies that depend on somebody running somewhere in order to get a message to somebody,
Mm.
and now everything is dealt with digitally. And I feel like that's kind of um like I hear people like there not really being any new like any new novelists, but I feel like writers today have a higher challenge, have like a much like tougher challenge than any previous generation. Like not only is nobody reading anymore, but the landscape has turned, like the world has turned into such an alien landscape in the span of 10 years, basically, like the most like insane technological shift in human history. Um, and all new language has been attached to it. All of the language sounds Soviet, by the way. Like you can't
Hmm.
talk about technology without using this like crippling Soviet style language. Um, so it all just sounds ugly.
Mm.
And you know, it's like if I'm practicing writing, I have to write text message. Like I have to write the word text message, you know? It's like, oh my God, like this. So yeah, I don't know. I think that there'll obviously be solutions that are found for it eventually. I do truly believe things move in cycles, and
Mm.
hopefully men will come back. Um, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I guess you got to start writing stuff that's not just about like um liberal upper
The
class
contemporary condition.
liberal women with you know first world problems or something like that. Like it's yeah, like
Yeah.
um yeah, make some stuff with some testosterone, please. But anyway, but or not, maybe not. Like I think Little Big, like John Crowley isn't the most like high tea individual, but like his stuff is like there's something here for everyone. It's not just for like the girls and gays, you know. There's lots in here that is really fun. And this part, Old Law Farm, which is book three, like we said up top, is a kind of hinge point where stuff, I don't want to say that, I think the crudest way of saying this is probably the most straightforward, but like stuff happens after this. It's like stuff does happen in the first half, but like it is very, there's a lot of meandering, a lot of like different characters, a lot of exploring the family tree of the Drinkwaters and the Edgewood house and surrounds. But after this, we get into some like I think the core of the book comes after this, like a lot of exciting stuff. But it's one of those
Mm.
things where you need all of that up front. It's very funny because like a lot of people, although I was reading a review on this the other day, like a contemporary review, I think, and they complained about that he needed an editor and they needed to cut all of the stuff at the front, you know, or a lot of it anyway. And then, you know, crux of the story being all of the interesting shit that happens towards the end. But it's like, I think you need it. I think you need all of that
You
meandering. You
absolutely need
need,
it.
it's like Moby Dick. Have you ever read Moby Dick?
Yes, I have. Yeah, you
Everyone
need all of
everyone complains about the
it.
like going on and on and on about whales, the different type of whales, and their ambergris is like this color, whereas this is that. Yeah, all of that is it's interminable. Like it just goes on forever. I think it goes on for literally like 170 pages or something like that, like a ridiculous amount of
Yeah,
time. But it wouldn't be Moby Dick if it didn't have that big fucking chunk of like very encyclopedic like information about whales.
yeah.
It just wouldn't be the same book. Like you need to
It
have
wouldn't at all. Yeah.
that kind of level of
You need
autistic
to like,
detail and meandering. You know?
yeah. I think like I think like people were gluttoned on the idea of like books being these entertainment, like being like
Mm,
like for entertainment purposes only. And I think most people do want kind of a quote unquote compulsive read, which has its own kind of magic. I find this to be a very easy and actually compulsive book to read, but that's like I like the magic of language. But and this book does feel very magical. Um, but yeah, I think that like it forces you to kind of confront what it means to sort of be pleasured by a book. Um, and it is a lot of foreplay. Um, I guess maybe people who are really into foreplay really like this book. Um, I like, wait, like for example, like first of all, like also John Crowley has addressed criticisms about that. He has an essay on purple prose, um, and he talks about how he has taken these creative writing classes or taught these creative writing classes before and heard a lot of response from students and just in everyday life about people writing purple prose. And he basically writes this because he doesn't really know what that means. Like, and he says that he would describe his own writing. He thinks his own writing would be described as purple prose. Which I don't. I mean, I know, whatever. There's bad purple prose and there's good purple prose. But yeah, I was gonna say the really really beautiful part in this section is the part where Ariel Hawkswill talks about the art of memory. Can
I
I
think
can I
that,
actually read the section?
yeah. I think that section is called The Art of Memory, isn't it? From
Yeah,
memory. From memory.
yeah, yeah. The art of yeah. It's sort of like the part I always like to read from is basically, yeah, just from the beginning of chapter 4. But so we've well a few chapters ago. And it says Ariel Hawkswill, greatest mage of this age of the world, and a match she was not too modest to think of many great ones of the so-called past, with whom she now and then discovered, possessed no crystal ball. Judicial astrology she knew to be a fraud, though she had uses for the old pictured heavens. She disdained spells and geomancies of all kinds, except at great need, and the sleeping dead in their secrets she let sleep. Her one great art, and it was all of all, and required no vulgar tools, no book, no wand, no word. It could be practiced as, on a certain rainy afternoon of the winter in which Oberon came to Old Law Farm, she was practicing it, before the fire, with feet up, and tea and toast at hand. It required nothing but the interior of her skull, that and a concentration and an acceptance of impossibility which saints would have found admirable and chess masters difficult. The art of memory, as it is described by ancient writers, is a method by which the natural can be improved tremendously, beyond recognition in fact. The ancients agreed that vivid pictures in a strict order were the most easily remembered. Therefore, in order to construct an artificial memory of great power, the first step, Quintilian and other authorities agree on this, though they diverge at other points, is to choose a place, a temple, for instance, or a city street of shops and doorways, or the interior of a house. Any place that has parts which occur in a regular order. This place is committed to memory carefully and well, so well that they'll scurry around it backwards, forwards, any which way it will. The next step is to create vivid symbols or images for the things one wishes to remember. The more shocking and highly colored, the better, according to the experts. A ravished nun, say, for the idea of sacrilege, or a cloaked figure for with a bomb for revolution. These symbols are then cast onto the various parts of the memory place, its doors, niches, forecourts, windows, closets, and other spaces. And then the rememberer has simply to go around his memory if he wishes and take from each spot the thing which symbolizes the notion which he wishes to remember. I feel like that's enough. That was a damn long sentence. But yeah, I feel like that section really gets to like in some ways it's kind of a justification of the book itself and a justification for the act of reading.
Mm,
Uh, like it's like the imagination place to wander and as like a kind of magic in a way, like the highest form of magic being basically creating your own mind.
mm.
Um, so yeah, I feel like that is why I think that these people who don't think Moby Dick is perfect as it is are such nitwits.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
it's like you don't want to make a memory palace. Like, what the hell are
Yeah.
you doing with your life? Like,
Yeah, like the sense of wandering that you like, that it's something that I
yeah,
don't know that it's something that has to be learned, but like once you've read a few books, like I we all love a thriller, we all love a page turner. Like one
yeah,
that's
of
like
course.
what that's like specifically set out to do that. But it's about its intention and effect aligning. And like I think his intention and effect aligns here in the sense that he wants you to wander in that first part. Like it's like the going into the woods and just like maybe we're weird. Like maybe we're the sort of people who do this, but I love just going out into the bush or whatever and just having a wander around. Like not even
Yeah,
sticking to the paths or whatever, just like wandering around and seeing what happens, and this you can even do that in the
yeah,
city. There's that whole Guy Debord thing about psychogeography and like just not going down the planned routes of the boulevards and shit like that. Like just,
yeah,
letting the wind take you where it will and kind of meandering and that being an exploratory kind of purpose, like, sort of practice. Like, yeah, viewing it like that, I think is much more fruitful than just like, oh, quick, let's get to the end. Like when you go on a wander through
yeah,
the
yeah,
woods, you're not like, oh, where are we headed? Where are we going? Like, um,
yeah, yeah. Part of it also like connects to I think John Crowley's like why his language is actually so simple and straightforward.
mm,
It's like it's the kind of book where you actually don't when you're plugged in, you don't really think about the language very much. Like your brain isn't thinking about these like it's not like when you're reading Ulysses and you're thinking about every single word. Like literally your brain is tripping over every single word he
mm,
says. Um I feel like in this like kind of your consciousness doesn't catch on any words except for when he wants you to.
mm,
Um so there is something very free flowing about it basically. Um and like when I'm reading this book I'm just kind of like in this place where I'm just kind of watching my imagination almost.
mm.
Um, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
Which
complete
I think is
sense. Yeah.
the ideal. It's the ideal for an artist, I think. Um, it's that ideal moment, and I think very few artists are, or there are very few times in your life where you really have that experience with a work of art.
Mm.
Um, probably more often for the two of us since we're such freaks who just like wandering the woods alone. Um, in search of what I
Who
wonder.
knows? Fairies, maybe, or
Yeah, who
a
knows?
UFO
Yeah, there.
conspiracist or something. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. All right. So, anything else to say on this segment of the book before we discuss?
No, I think that was pretty much it. Yeah, thanks for letting me ramble about
Mm,
modern technology.
yeah, I love a good ramble about modern technology. In the Patreon, we will be talking about the recently departed writer Alice Munro. John's a big fan of her.
R.I.P.
I've just literally read one story of hers for this episode, but I'm sure John will educate me. He'll Munro pill me
Yeah.
on Alice. Yeah, and what is it about? I don't know. I always get very taken in by female Canadian writers. Like, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're beguiling.
I even like Margaret Atwood.
Yeah, so do I. That's what I mean. Yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, thanks
Yeah.
for joining us again. And we'll talk. I don't know. By the way, I don't know why we're talking about Alison Monroe other than she's dead. But like, I think John has some kind of point of connection that'll be very interesting to explore.
Oh, okay.
Which, yeah, you do, don't you? Or you just wanted to talk about Alison Monroe?
Yeah, it was with
We can talk about it in the Patreon.
are we doing like a hard yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah.
You'll
Thanks. And
find
yeah,
out.
you'll find out if you go over to the Patreon, go to Getting Lit. No, sorry, patreon.com/Getting Lit, and you will hear us discoursing about Alice Munro and its relationship to Little Big. But yeah, thanks again, John.
Of course. It's
Cool.
been a pleasure.